is very, very, very rare. I don't know of another one in the world. And I'll tell you about it. Can you read it? It's in German.
Oh.
Okay, so after my father parachutes, he lands, he's got no shoes on. It's November in Germany with snow on the ground. And he landed in a plowed field. So he buried his parachute. He doesn't know where his buddies are. So he knows by the stars. He could tell directions by the stars because he was trained to do that.
Yeah.
Because
Did
this
he
is
find
his
his boots?
sight log book.
Gordon,
This is how.
tell them why he buried the parachute, though. That's very interesting.
I know why,
Yeah.
because like you want to make sure that they don't find
Yes.
your parachute, so they don't know that you escaped.
Very
It's live.
So
good.
in this thing here, this tool is called a sextant, and years ago, like Christopher Columbus, when he found North America, how did he find his way home?
The stars?
Yes, using a sextant. So my father was able to, Walker J.B. Sargent, and there's his number. He learned to read the stars. So while after he was shot down and he parachutes, he's going to try to walk through the country of Belgium because they were neutral. They wouldn't hurt him. He walked 22 kilometers in the night. 22 kilometers is almost from Prince Albert to Birchills almost. That's a long way to walk at night
With no shoes.
with no shoes.
Oh, with no shoes.
In the
And
snow.
it's cold.
In the
Did he find
snow.
his shoes?
No.
Probably not.
So
They got buried in the snow.
finally he's in a little village and the sun's starting to come up, and he had taken every badge off of his coat that he was wearing. So, but you see on the side they said Canada?
Yeah.
He couldn't get that off.
Oh.
So he looks like he's in a suit, but he's in sock feet. And a German guard came along and said, "Halt!"
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'll tell that later. He said, he basically, and my dad was pretending he was drunk and trying and laughing, and the guy was laughing at him and whatever. And he said, "Go." And my dad went to turn around. He saw that and he put his gun and said, "Halt, Canada." He said, "Halt." And my dad was taken prisoner.
Jeez.
He could have gotten away with it.
I know, he was so close.
But they
So
were
he
gone
ended up in prison.
Oh, that's why it's in German.
And that's why it's in German. And that's his picture taken after 7 days on bread and water. All he ate was bread and water in that picture.
He's
Okay?
skinny.
And it tells if they knew his parents' address. He had a scar on his right arm because he'd broken his arm riding a big horse.
Oh.
They knew all that stuff. Anyway, he's in prison. Nobody knows he's alive or dead. The family, nobody knows. So eventually the family received a telegram because there was no internet, there was nothing like
Yeah,
that.
there wasn't any in it.
And in the telegram, there was a message, and it just said, "We rejoice with you." That's all it said. "We rejoice with you." And that meant he was alive. So the family all said, "Oh, God, he's alive. Good,
Oh,
good."
wow.
So they were able to send Red Cross parcels and things to him in prison. They sent him a sweater. He went from November, when he was shot down, he spent 6 weeks in rail cars on a train that were used for cattle. He lived in there for 6 weeks till he got to the prison, and barely any food, and dirty, and he's in this bare sock feet.
Were the cattle
It was-
cars like they were packed full too,
Of
or
people.
were packed full of people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
A lot went to
all of the prisoners the Germans were taking were people from the Air Force or the ocean, from the Navy. But most of the 95% of the prisoners they got were from the Air Force because there was nobody on land in Germany fighting yet. So it was not until March that he got a pair of shoes, and they were wooden shoes from a country called Denmark. And they were wooden shoes. And he said they were horrible. They were terrible.
Have you ever seen wooden shoes?
They were kind of like wooden clogs.
You
Like,
got-
Yeah, oh yeah, I've seen those.
I'll ask Rhea. She has a pair. Rhea is from Holland.
Yeah. She was born in
And
Holland, and
she
she was
wore-
alive during the war.
Wooden shoes.
Okay, so my dad's in prison. He's got no shoes till March. And they're hungry, and their food was mostly turnips and turnip tops and potatoes. And it was a huge camp. There was 10,000 men in there. And there was a great big building full of potatoes. So my father and some guys would sneak out at night, go over the roof, made a hole in the roof, and would go in and get sacks of potatoes and bring them back and cook them. So they were stealing potatoes. Well, one night they got caught. So I'll tell you the way I heard this, okay? So my father and all these guys are lined up, and my father's got a bag of potatoes. And this, what my father called a big, dumb Yank. You know what a Yank is? A Yankee,
What's a Yankee?
is an American.
Oh.
He's big, and my father said he was kind of dumb. And he's got a bag of potatoes, so my dad says, "Here, hold these potatoes for me." So he's holding 2 bags, and my father's got one. So the guys with the potatoes got big punishment. My father got 3 weeks in solitary confinement. He said it was the best 3 weeks of the war because there was not 10,000 people around him. It was quiet, and he said it was good. Anyway, he did 3 weeks in solitary confinement.
I would be happy.
So I'm going to take these are a lot of stories. My father grew up. Do you know where my mom lived? Did you ever take them out to the farm?
yeah, when they're younger, but not.
My father went to a little school where Jerry Conklin lived.
Mm-hmm.
And he would walk to school. And where Bernie Berkley lived
Yes.
was Leonard Apps lived there. And he and Dad played ball. They went to school together. Leonard walked 3 miles to school. My dad walked 1.5 miles to school. They were good friends. Leonard joined the Army, and my dad joined the Air Force. But the Army is training in England because they haven't got to England yet. Okay? My dad is in June of 1944, thousands of boats of people went from England to Germany, soldiers, and they started fighting the Germans. It was called the Normandy invasion. So all of these boats, any little rowboat, anything, big boats, sailboats, anything that would carry people was used to carry soldiers across. Leonard Apps was there on Normandy invasion. And on about the 2nd or 3rd day, about the 8th of June, he was captured. Leonard was captured. And he spent 6 weeks in cattle cars. And he ended up in the same prison camp as my dad. But my dad didn't know that.
Oh.
My dad is in solitary confinement, and he hears roll call. Every morning you would have to answer your name, right?
Oh yeah.
So he hears, "Apps, Leonard, here." Oh my God, he's in the same prison camp as I am. So my dad found him. My dad, when he got out of solitary, he found him, and my dad gave him some clothes and things, because Leonard didn't have much for clothes. And so they were friends. In 1976, I went to England, and I went to see my father's cousin. Her name was Kathy Walker Thompson. And she was married to Robin Thompson, and they were very nice people, and they had one son, and he was killed during the war. And she gave me his baby blanket, and your mom came home in it from the hospital. I still have that baby blanket. I'll show you.
And Merrick, I promise you this, whichever one has the first grandchild gets the blanket.
Brings the baby home.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it.
Anyway,
No.
so
When you're 30.
Leonard, I was
Oh,
visiting
funny.
Kathy Walker Thompson in 1976, and she said, Gordon, I got something I want to give you, and she gave me this letter. And it says, Mr. R. Thompson in England. And letter from Leonard Apps to Kathy's husband after his return to England. And he's writing in the letter, I've got the letter, and it says, John was so good to me in prison, and he gave me clothes, and he gave me food, and he said I'll never be able to thank him. And he said, I hope the war is over soon, and he is home. And I thought, how can he be in prison, and yet he's writing this from England to them? So this is a good story. Near the end of the war, in 1945, May of 1945, the war ended. In about March or April of 1945, the Germans came to the camp and they said, we want to take a bunch of men to repair bridges and roads. So they took Leonard. My dad didn't even know where he was going, right? They took him. He's working for the Germans, building bridges and stuff. He's a slave, right? Yeah. So a bunch of Americans came upon them and took the Germans prisoner, and now Leonard and his friends are free. And Leonard is sick. So the commanding officer said, you're sick, get on that plane. And the next thing you know, he's back in England. Yeah. And he spent some time in hospital. And after he's done in hospital, he went to see Robin and Kathy, because he would go with my dad on leave to visit them. So he wrote, after he left, he wrote the letter and he said, I hope the war's over soon. I hope John's home. So I had always heard that story, but I never knew the secrets of it. In 2014, the year before you were born, I was in the hospital visiting your grandma, and there's a guy pushing a man in a wheelchair, and it's Leonard Apps. And I went home and I got that, and I got the letter, and I took it and I showed it, and Kenny took a picture of me and Mr. Apps and his son and the letter.
I saw
And
that
he
picture.
explained that, oh yeah, I was taken prisoner and I got released, and that's why I would have never figured out all of that story, that how he got back to England and before the war was over. It was very strange to me. I could never understand it. So that's the story.
Gordon, tell her the kindness your dad showed that woman.
Okay.
That one just...
Yeah.
My
I remember
dad
this one. Yeah.
My dad is a very kind man. And he's in prison. He's sick. He has tuberculosis. It's very bad disease. He's very sick in prison. And the family would send boxes through the Red Cross. And he got some chocolate bars and some socks and a sweater. And one day they are out in the fences, wire fence all around, and a group of Jewish people went walking. They were Jewish prisoners, two or three guards and about 10 Jewish people, and they walked 5 miles to get an armful of wood and walk 5 miles back for wood for their to keep them warm at night. And this woman had a little dress on and hardly any clothes, and she's in snow up to here. And my dad took his sweater off and rolled it and made it into a football and threw it over the fence to her. And she probably died in the gas chambers. They call them the gas chambers. It's very, very tough time. But she probably died, but my dad gave her that slip. And Lori Lang, Donnie and Jack's dad, he told me that after my dad died. I didn't know that. My dad never said that. But Lori Lang told me that, yeah. And
Even
then
though
my
he
dad,
was cold,
Mm-hmm.
he took his sweater off to give it
Yeah.
to a woman he knew was going to the gas station.
Yeah. Wow.
when the war was over, then they announced, hey, the war is over, you guys are free, but you can't leave yet because the Russians had taken over the camp,
Yeah.
and the Russians were fighting with us, but they were not very nice people. They were very bad to the German people. My dad didn't hate the German people, but my dad said they were just terrible to the Germans. So they had to stay in the camp for 2 months, and airplanes would drop them food. So they were okay, but they couldn't leave. But before the Germans left, they burnt the office and they burnt all of the documents and all of the papers. My dad had borrowed Mac's watch, his pilot. He had borrowed Mac's watch because when they bombed, they needed to time it on a watch. So, and my dad didn't have a watch, so he borrowed Mac. Well, Mac is gone, and in the file, in the cabinets in the office, is Mac's watch, right? They took it. My dad went into a burning building, and he got Mac's watch, and he got a German officer's hat, and he got his prisoner of war record. That's why it's so rare. 99.999% of those burnt. That's why that's such a rare document. The other thing I was going to mention, Leonard Apps's family didn't know if he was alive or dead. And from the prison, they were allowed to send, like we used to call postcards, but little letters home to their family. And Dad sent a letter home, and he said, where is it here? Saw my old school chum. My old school chum is still here also, and all the gang. When he sent that home, his parents realized that was Leonard Apps. So they drove to Leonard Apps's farm, his parents' farm, and said, your boy is alive. They didn't know. That's all true. Yeah.
Most people
Very
had
neat.
to stay from the war when it was done to clean up.
Yeah. So, and that's the house where your mom grew up.
Mm-hmm.